Welcome to
Tea Time with Jen?
yes.
Tea Time with Jen. Or back to the Padilla family homestead. We're here for Tea Time with Jen. If you have been following along, you are fully aware this is my husband, Eugenio, and I am Jennifer.
The Great.
or Jen. And this is a segment we do in the winter. This is the second season we've done it. And we get in and we are talking about some of the bigger topics. Before we dive into the topics, though, we always share what tea we are drinking. Sometimes there's more repeats. This year there have been more repeats, but yes. So what are you drinking today, honey?
Lemon Lift.
Which is a lemon black tea. So it's just fresh, and I think it would be really good as an iced tea too.
Yes.
Oh, show me your mug.
It says, I'd agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong.
I thought that was a Junior mug.
Yes.
So he goes by Junior.
Very much like me.
Yes, it's funny. So I'm drinking a wild berry. It's very pink. A wild berry tea today. Very fruity.
Sounds very wild. You're
It's
wild
very
one.
yummy. So, okay. So today's topic being the fact that you are seeing this at the beginning of the new year. So this is our first tea time with Jen in 2024, and we are talking.
2024.
Well, not when we're recording this, but when they see this, yes.
Feel old.
So we're talking about taking ownership, with intentionally taking ownership. Not just somebody's giving you a task to do, right, and you're doing it, but actually taking ownership of things. And I think this is a good time to kind of talk about that. A lot of people do resolutions. We don't really do resolutions anymore. We do goals. And we have kind of talked about that prior to this video. You should have seen that. I think it was the video before this one, actually,
right,
that we posted. And but a lot of that comes down to when you're assessing your year and how your life and where you've been and so forth, and you're setting new goals. Part of that is a huge part of being successful in goals, and just, I think, successful in almost any area in life, is to take ownership of things. And I think that's something that's really lacking overall in the world today. At least the world that's advertised to us, that's something that's really lacking. I do see a lot of people, I know a lot of people who take ownership of things. And so that's kind of what we're going to dive into, the different areas where you could take ownership, and that are important to some of the areas that we have taken ownership in, areas that we need to take more ownership in, and kind of talk on that. So first off, honey, I know we haven't prepped for this at all. This is just going to be a free conversation here. But
like for me, I think taking ownership would be like not following on somebody else to help me with like a better diet. Me actually putting in my brain eating healthier is important for me. And the biggest thing that I know is that if I can't take care for me, how can I take care for her?
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to take pride and ownership of my health, just like I did with diabetes. I had to take it upon myself to get me to the point where I was going to be good, because the poking was bad.
Well, and to stay at the point where you're good.
Right.
And which is a lifelong journey of taking ownership.
Because even though I'm considered good, I still have to watch what I'm doing, because I could easily just go back into it. So taking ownership about health, taking ownership about chores, taking ownership about lots of things that you just do on your day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think health, your responsibilities around the house. I think taking ownership of our behavior,
Yeah.
whether we make mistakes or we
Yeah.
succeed at something, taking ownership of that,
Yeah.
taking ownership of the words that come out of our mouth.
Which
And
also can be hard. Like,
oh, it's all hard.
it's because for me, especially because I'm not trying to make excuses, but I feel like I'm dyslexic, and
Mhm.
I kind of know that I'm
You are.
dyslexic, but also with like the language barrier, sometimes I can say something, and to her, she'll be like, "Did you really mean it like this, or are you meaning it like this?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I never thought about it like that, but okay, yeah, I meant it like this, not the other way. Like, you made it sound like this, so just make sure you say it properly to where it's not going to come out wrong.
Well, and I have the patience and understanding, but not everybody does.
And I feel like this, where we're at in home, is where I can learn, so I don't do it out in the real world and actually offend people out there. But because this is our safe spot.
It is. It is. And I think personally taking ownership of your environment, I think is huge. And whether you succeed at something or not, and I think there's a point where there is a point where you can, I don't believe people should be completely self-sufficient. I think we should be community sufficient. And so taking ownership in our relationships and whether or not they're succeeding or not and are part of them, right? Because it takes two. I'm not going to take ownership if he's not pulling weight in the relationship, but I can take ownership of my reactions. I can take ownership of what I'm saying. I can take ownership of how I'm treating him, all of those things. And so I think there's a lot of things in life that people don't think about necessarily that you need to take ownership of. And there may be more that come up in the topic of today's conversation. But that's kind of what the topic is. And doing that with intention, because so many times we see it is somebody else's responsibility for the reason why our food system is the way it is. And so that's why we eat the way that we eat. It's somebody else's responsibility for not getting this done on time. So I'm not going to worry about where I am on that, right? Because taking ownership of our portion of our daily work is really important. And I think there's a lot of excuses that are made and then allowed. And teaching our kids to take ownership is really important. This is something that we have driven really hard into the last couple of years, especially. But I always have, but it's been more of a focus as she's getting older with my daughter. And really teaching her to take ownership and responsibility, right? We're using the word ownership, but ownership is responsibility, right? That's the other word for it. It's taking responsibility for things.
Yeah, I think the biggest responsibility I had to start with is actually reading labels.
In regards to your health?
In regards to health, because, I mean, you would think a specific item is healthy, but on the other end, it really isn't, because it has X amount of sugars and X amount of calories and X amount of sodium, and it's just a matter of looking at everything, you know. And I think taking ownership by doing your part and starting off, what's gonna work for you? Is this gonna work for you? I know you can't cut everything out, but in reality, healthier is better.
Well, and it's not a so one of the things that our daughter has had to learn, and he's learned, and I have learned, because we've talked about this before. We all have different dietary things. So since we're talking about health right now, we'll jump into that. But I primarily do the cooking. So I try to take ownership in what I am serving, right? My portion of my responsibility in that health. But when they're not eating what I am serving, or if I'm serving something that I am incorrect on what is the best, right? Or maybe I'm having a craving and I really want something, so I make that, right? And it's it's their responsibility to make sure what they are eating is correct. It is their responsibility to make sure their portions are the sizes that they think that they should have. I am not sitting there with strict guidelines and structure going, you can only eat this. I'm not going to weigh all the food and all the things, because that's setting somebody else up for failure. I check myself and I know what I'm eating, and I keep track of my sodium for the day, and I keep track of how much I've been eating, my calories, and whatever else I need to keep track of. But it's not my responsibility to keep track of theirs. Now I can offer the correct foods, but everything has to be in moderation. And I think that's where he's going at, is learning for himself to take ownership. And that's, my daughter's had to do that. She's in 2 different households. So being able to know, and being a teenager and being out and about and doing more social things, she has to make decisions on what she's eating.
And I think that's hard too, because when you're being social and around your friends,
with the peer pressure,
and you don't want to be the one that looks and does the weird things, because you have restrictions of what you can and can't eat, or limitations because you're glucose intolerant, or gluten. Sorry,
you're glucose sugar.
But you know what I mean.
Yes. So yeah, it is hard, and that's something as a teenager that she had to, when this all came down, she had to decide as she went through her health journey and figuring out of whether she was going to cheat and eat gluten sometimes and not, and how that affected her body. And she had to take ownership of that, because nobody else is responsible for her health except for her. Again, I try to offer all the right things, but we all have different dietary needs. So sometimes there's going to be different things on the table that are great for each one of us, and some of us have to skip on one and skip on the other. And that's how working as a family unit works, right? Because somebody shouldn't have to sacrifice completely for, 2 people should not have to sacrifice completely for somebody else, but that one person shouldn't have to sacrifice all of their health needs for the other person. So it's really finding that balance, but also taking ownership, and this is what I need to do, right?
Yeah.
And learning, doing the research aspect.
Yeah, I think like one of the biggest keys for me is trial and error. And that's only what sometimes I learn. It's like when, like, for instance, example is, with diabetes, you have to poke your finger, check your glucose levels, and depending on what you eat is how it comes out. So keeping a log of what you ate, and then changing what you eat the next time and seeing if that makes a difference. That's how I found out that doing balsamics helped so much. It helps so much. I'm like, anytime I had salad with balsamic, it was a lot better than,
or rice, or like stir fry, anything.
It was a lot better than ranch dressing, because I never knew that milk had sugars. I'm like, milk has sugars, but then you read the labels, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I'll cut off this type of milk, go with something more organic, like coconut milk that's unsweetened, or something that's, I know it's not the same thing, but
everybody has their replacements, substitutes.
Yes, substitutes, and just stuff like that makes a world of difference.
It does, and when you start to take the ownership of it, there's a sense of pride when you succeed. And it's not somebody else's success, it is your own, and it's a goal that you're working towards. So that's a lot about food. There's also the aspect of exercise and being intentional with that. And that's something this year that we struggled a lot with this last year, because with his injury, I had an injury on my leg. We've had a lot of different things come up, and that was one thing that went more to the wayside. So towards the end of 2023, the exercise became more of a focus, but it's part of our health. And so intentionally taking ownership of our health means we have to go, okay, it's not just food's not going to solve everything.
No.
So exercise has to come in and do that, but also setting realistic expectations for ourselves coming back from injuries and so forth on what we can and cannot do, and then supporting each other in each other's goals, because we both have different goals based on our limitations on what we're supposed to, where we're supposed to be at, right?
Yeah.
And so taking that ownership is really important, because let's say he's having an off day. I need to be willing to get up and go for a walk by myself, right? And go do that, and not just go, oh, it's because nobody else would walk with me. That's a mindset shift, and we've talked about some of that so far in Tea Time with Jed. But it's taking that ownership. Is it important to you? And this comes back to your why. Why are you living with intention? Why are you making these choices and changes? Why are you trying to live a healthier life? Why are you adjusting your mindsets? All of these things come back to that. And for us, we want to focus on being healthy as a whole. Yeah. And that means spiritual health. That means physical health. That means emotional health. That all of the aspects of health, right? We need to focus on all of those things. And if one is really not doing good, you're rolling through life on a flat tire. It just, you're going to keep dudding, right? And so just imagine a wooden wheel, and one side's flat because you've plateaued there and you're not focusing there. All your energy's been everywhere else. That's really hard to steer your wagon of life down the road. And
because you're always going to bump.
Right. And so that kind of has been when taking ownership of things, it's figuring out what's going on your wheel. What's happening with your wheel? And I guess you can view the wagon as your family, right? And depending on how big your family is, depends on how many wheels you have. And his wheel being off affects how the family operates, but we all help him with that if that's the case, but it's his responsibility. His wheel is his responsibility, and it's based on his focus and where he's intentionally spending his time and his energy. Same thing for me. If my wheel's off, it affects everybody else around me and my family, and yet they come alongside of me. And really grasping that and taking ownership of your circle, your thing that you have to deal with, is really important. Yeah. Is there anything on health that you could think of that you want to add before we move on?
Not taking really, ownership? Because you covered everything about mainly mentality and focus and heart and willingness and trying to stay focused on your health and everything.
And all aspects of health.
All aspects of health.
So you look at all the aspects and be honest. If you can't be honest with yourself, you're not going to improve on anything.
Yeah. And that's, I think, it's like what she said. You can't rely on one person. You also have to do it for yourself. But sometimes having that person that is there to help you with it helps the situation.
Right. And helps in a way that is encouraging.
Yes.
And is supportive, not, yo, sucker, you're blowing it.
Yeah.
Like, that's not helpful. Usually somebody who's struggling knows in a way that they are struggling on some level.
Yeah.
It is the way out or the solution or something that is the barrier. And some people give up and they're not fighters. Some people just are trying to survive and just don't have the capacity to step outside of what they are doing. And so sometimes we need to come alongside, but come out alongside in love. Yeah. Especially when you're talking like depression or things along those lines.
The other thing is also, sometimes having that person that checks you, like, hey, I know you're going through this, but what are you doing about it to get better, to get it out of this loop that you're in, you know?
Yeah.
So I know it doesn't fall within taking ownership.
It kind of does, because if you're taking ownership of your life and you're taking ownership of these things, intentionally putting in support systems that are going to help you succeed is part of taking ownership, right? Knowing that you can't necessarily always do it all. So building your support system intentionally to help you succeed, that is part of taking ownership.
Yeah, because you could have that person that checks you, and you could be that person that checks them at the same time.
You can be. Maybe, and depending on the situation, what they need help with, check on, you may not be that person.
True.
Because sometimes people need help, but they're not at the capacity to be able to give it back.
Right, different strengths.
And in different times and seasons and so forth. So, but if you can have it be the support that goes back and forth, that's great. But sometimes that's not the case. And being honest, just this is a side thing, being honest, if you're somebody's support person or somebody asks you to be a support person, you need to check and see what that's going to do in your life. How you can, is this really something that you can take on? Because if somebody is needing help and you cannot actually really help them, you're not failing yourself, you're failing somebody else. And so really being honest with yourself on the level of what you can take on is, I think, important. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about ownership for work. Can be a topic. We've had very different work environments. We have had different work journeys. And each of us, in all the different capacities of work, had a mindset of taking ownership. And it wasn't a popular mindset always with other people. And so this is something that we have seen over the years. And I think it's very basic, and it comes down to your moral standard, right? My mom taught me from a very young age, whatever you do it with all your heart to the best of your ability. And that's basically what it comes down to, right? You do it because it's right. You are doing the thing that is right, even if no one sees you and even if no one is watching, and you will never get credit for it. Are you still going to do what's right because it's right? And that's something in your head and in your heart on how you view things.
I did just that, but also taking it to where they just treat it like it's family. Like, would you do this at your grandma's house? Would you do this at your grandpa's house? Do things for the right reasons. Do things because go that extra step. It goes a long way.
It does.
It's just.
Well, and it comes back to, you can tell when somebody's taking ownership of what they are doing, taking responsibility for their actions, how they interact with customers, how they interact with coworkers, how they interact with anybody around them, right? Versus somebody who doesn't take that responsibility. And
I think the way I notice is the person actually doing the right thing will take pride in what they do, versus the person that doesn't do it right will just be lousy and not.
They're seeking.
It's more of a, this is my 8 to 4 job. I just want to get home type of thing.
And they're seeking the attaboy from the boss versus the attaboy from within themselves. And I say within themselves because it comes down to there's a lot of this that comes down to, I think, the moral standard, right? And how we view things. A lot of things come back down to religion, and what you believe to be right and wrong. It's where your moral standard comes from. And so everybody has a kind of different standard. But for us, we get that attaboy on the inside for doing what's right because it's right. because we know where we're doing what we're supposed to do. And we know, even though humans don't see it, God sees it.
Right.
And so that changes kind of the outlook a little bit. And I can see where people who don't believe that may come at it from a different perspective, but I can't fathom that perspective, so I don't know how to talk on that. So you have to figure out why you are at the moral compass you are at, why you believe this, and then I never see something wrong with being nice to somebody else or doing what you are asked to do fully. It's if somebody asks you to jump, you say how high, like get the details, do it well, make it shine, and do unto others what you want them to do unto you. If you're paying somebody to wash your car, do you want to get it back dirty? No. So if your job is to wash people's cars, then you're going to give it back to them the way you would want it back from somebody doing it for you.
Right.
And if you take that into the workplace,
I find that not just that, also going the extra step. Like for me, I take ownership in my job, what I used to do, and especially a job where you're inside people's homes. You would sometimes run across, a house where the person's elderly and they can't change a light bulb in a fixture, and you hear them complain about it. Then you're like, would you like me to replace that for you? I can do that right now.
Even though it's not part of your job.
Even though it's not part of your job, but if you're there and you know how to do it without, injuring yourself or causing damage to the house, then do it for them, and that'll.
Well, and you're taking responsibility and ownership for your impact on that person's life, not just for your job, but for your impact on that person's life and their view of your company as a whole.
And it's not that you're doing it for glory. I want to say you're doing it because you feel like it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And sometimes you'll hear back from them like, hey, they want a specific person because he was there last time and they replaced their light and nobody ever else has offered to do anything like that for them. And it's not like you're wanting the pat in the back, but it's the type of things like that make you succeed in life.
Right. Because
it's what they call the referral. It's kind of like you get, in a way, in the future, God pays you back by, hey, you did something nice, I'm going to send you to somebody else to where you can do something nice. Or
I think that's the view of what the world looks at as karma. But it's really, you are building relationships. And when you build relationships and you do things good, people want to be around you. People want to have you there. And that is known and it's seen. And I don't necessarily think it's God doing a payback for doing it, but I do believe that in eternity,
because it's more of a,
those things are somewhat accounted for, but your faith is number one.
You help so X person, and then this person will feel like you're in their family, and they want you to be part of their family, so they invite you to their, daughter's house to work on their systems or whatever it is that you're doing. It's like, hey, so and so was really good to me. Can you go help them out over there or whatever?
And I think this is something that is very lacking in a lot of the certain generations. And I'm not going to say particular generations because I get told that all the time about being a millennial, and I'm on the older end of a millennial. And I think it's dangerous to do a checkbox and say everybody has this. But I do think there is something in culture that shifted, and there's something in culture that made it to where it's instant gratification. It is what is going to, we get what we want when we want it. I mean, you don't have to wait a week or 2 weeks for something to be shipped to you. You have it on your doorstep 24 hours later or 2 days later with Amazon Prime. You don't have to wait to talk to somebody until they get home. You can call them anywhere they are. There's so many things. That expectation of waiting and the buildup of things is gone, right? That working towards something. If you want it, you have it. And I think with that there came the working hard for something is not the same as it used to be. Taking ownership of whether your house was going to be warm or not during the winter. There are still some people who do this, right? But a lot of us have heaters. If it falls back on it, you have a heater that's going to heat your house. It's not about how much you went out and chopped wood as a responsibility. It changes. So I think it's really important with our kids to give them tasks that they need to complete starting young, age appropriate tasks where they can feel good about themselves for getting things done, and you can cheer them on for doing things that they're supposed to do. Now there's going to be a lot of guidance, and there's going to be a lot of constructive criticism and possibly some punishments, but I think it's really important to praise the things that they do well and keep that separate from the criticism. Because if you're only praising at the same time you're criticizing, people don't hear it the same way. Think how you would accept that, right? And so keeping praise separate from the criticism when you can. Sometimes parenting, that's just not the case. And so sometimes you need to sandwich it. But I think that's important because both of us got taught responsibility from a very young age and how important it was to take ownership. And there's a lot of people I've met that are younger who weren't necessarily taught that. And I think part of that comes from separate, like both parents working outside the home and the level of responsibility and the change. Things are just different than they used to be.
I think like there's always been something in my head, like, I don't know if it's within the topic or not, but it's when I grew up, when I was the technology was shifting so fast that by the time I got into my, let's say I didn't get my own cell phone till I worked for it and bought it when I was 19 or 20. And that was a flip phone, a Nokia flip phones. And then a few years went by and they came out with touch screen phones. And when I went into my trade, when I was working in my trade, it was very hard to look for information based on your job. You had to go and look for the information, whether it was at vendors or people who had been in the trade for years, and actually talk to them in person and get the information you needed, versus now everything is a touch.
It's on Google.
It's on Google. You can just Google anything and it's there. Or you can look for parts and it's there. And
so why study?
Exactly.
It's
like what you were saying. Instant. It's right now. Everything's at a touch of a phone or a video. And back in the day, you actually have to hunt for that information, which is probably why I felt better about. Not saying that I felt better about it back then, but it made me feel more accomplished because once I got the job done and I did it the way it's supposed to be, I felt more accomplished because I got it done.
And it makes it so much more frustrating when you work so hard to get the knowledge and people have it at their fingertips and don't even try. I think, though, working for something is not a bad thing.
No.
Working hard and making a meal from scratch, that meal tastes so much better to me than a meal that I eat at the restaurant.
Right.
And guess what? I cherish it. I want to take care of the leftovers. Like, there's so much different about it. And then when you go from growing the food to serving the food to like cooking the food to serving and eating it, it's a whole another world. Your sense of pride and ownership.
Appreciate it more because you spend the time growing it.
Yeah.
It's
and I'm
like,
talking about a good pride here.
Yeah.
It is the sense of doing something well and to completion.
Accomplishment.
Yes. And I think that is key for teaching kids to take ownership. They have to take ownership to get that sense that they have that. And then when they learn that as a kid, it moves through into adulthood. And if we had all of our adults doing that, I think our world would be a very different place. But all of these things take intentionality, because it takes intentionality to sit there and learn something when you don't have to. You're so used to having it on a computer accessible. So what happens when the power goes out and you don't have internet? Like, if anything 2020 taught us, okay, I'm in California. We had 2020, we have viruses, we have all these things, but then you have summer where you have heat and fires and smoke, and you have wind and you have power outages. So now you have everybody stuck at home, you have the power out, and people didn't know what the heck to do with themselves. Thankfully, we were all set and we were good, but theirs took some intentionality to that, right?
Yeah.
And it made me even want to be more intentional about it, because there were so many things that, okay, so do you not know how to make bread if the power's out? Do you not know how to entertain yourself with the power is out? How does your world stop if you don't have something? And our instant gratification revolves around our power and the internet, power, and gas.
The other thing is having the skills and the items you need to survive through those type of situations too.
Right. And why is that important? Because those things could go fail. Even if you live, we are the Padilla family homestead, right? But we live in an apartment in California right now.
Yeah.
We are trying to homestead as much as possible in an apartment till the day that we have property. But it's a mindset, and it takes intentionality to do so.
Yeah.
And it is hard to go against the grain, and the why is so important.
Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to intentionally taking ownership, this is something you can do in every single avenue of your life. And it's something you need to teach to your children, and they need to teach to their children, because without it, you expect everybody else to take the responsibility. Take everybody. If you don't take ownership of your life, who is going to have ownership of your life?
Right.
That's a heavy question.
Yeah. And the biggest thing is, like, one of the reasons why I think I have learned from my parents about taking ownership is my dad always told me, like, don't expect to be around somebody that can cook for you.
Mm-hmm.
Learn so that way you can feed yourself. If you're hungry, what if you are at one point alone in the woods, stranded or up hiking? What are you gonna do to survive?
Or in our instance, I went down after having surgery or whatever else. We need to be able to fend for each other or do things.
Yeah, and the good thing about having multiple people that can cook is if one person can't, the other one can step up and say, like, hey, I'll take care of it, or back and forth. But that's because we got the skills and we learned and we took ownership of learning
It means you fail a lot. And we'll go into intentionally learning in another video, but you fail a lot because you are learning. Nobody is instantly perfect at everything. Some things you might be more inclined to.
Yeah.
But guys, I was not a baker. I was not a cook. I was not a good cook. My flavor was lacking.
She used to call herself Mrs. Kill All Plants.
Yeah, I had a black thumb because not a green thumb, the opposite of green. Everything's shriveled up and dead, right? And well, it's because I didn't take the time, and I didn't have the patience, and I didn't take the ownership that this is what, like, why is this important to me? It shifted in my head.
Yeah.
And
it's more of a working towards something, and you have a why, which is why you push forward and do what you gotta do.
So we'll jump into more learning later, but I think I want to wrap this up with, if you don't take ownership in your life,
right, who
is going to have ownership of your life? And that really comes down to teaching that to your kids, and that who may be different depending on where you are and how old you are and all of the things, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not going to do it, somebody else has to. And I think it's important that we take ownership for ourselves and take ownership of our health, take ownership of our mindsets, right? That's all part of health. Right. Take ownership of what we do with our hands and our time. Take ownership of what we're teaching our children and what we're raising them, but then letting go at the time that we need to let go, right? Taking ownership of relationships, our part in relationships, in building community and so forth. There's so many aspects to this. So I would love to hear some of the areas that you are really good at taking ownership in your life. And then maybe some goals that you have for this year where you're going to start taking more ownership of, right? And there's so many levels. There's so many levels to it all. Your health can go from all the different, the mindset, the food, the exercise, all these things, right? But then let's say in food, it's going to be where are you sourcing your food from and how much you're cooking your food at home, and is it ethically sourced? Is it organic? Where are you growing it? Like, there's so many different levels. Just start somewhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be everything all at once. No. You start somewhere and you slowly improve on one thing after another thing.
Right.
It's just food for thought for you to deep dive in your heart. And if you don't feel comfortable leaving a comment, don't leave a comment. But it's important for you to figure out inside of your heart and in your life. Talk to your spouse. These are good conversation starters. Yeah. To have conversation, figure out, why do you feel like it's important to take ownership? Yeah. If you aren't taking ownership, who is going to take ownership of your life? Who is that person or entity that is going to take ownership in your life? Teach your kids that and ask the questions. Get the conversation started. This is a great dinner conversation. Let's get it going, or doing something. So it's food for thought. We thank you for watching. And I hope to hear some of your thoughts in the comments if you are open to talking about it. And we will see you on the next video. And then next week we will have a new tea time with Jenna.
Yep. And don't forget to hit like if you like these videos, and comment. And when you comment, also let us know if there's any particular videos you would want us to do or discuss.
Yeah.
Or
we're making a list for next season. We're doing, these videos are, right now I think we're having a November, December, January. So I'm making a list for things we could talk about for the next season.
And if you'd like to help support our video, please subscribe.
Yes. He's so good at that. I always forget about those things. So we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for following along on our journey, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.